The fall. The sun hung heavy above the desert film set, its golden light spreading across the sand like a soft flame. Cameras, cables, and people moved in rhythm, capturing one more emotional scene of a long, exhausting shoot. Sandra Bullock stood under that burning light, wearing a simple beige dress for her character, her hair tied loosely, her eyes focused on the camera in front of her. It was a dramatic sequence, a scene of pain, loss, and endurance. She had already repeated it 6 times because the director wanted more emotion, more exhaustion, more realism. But what no one knew was that Sandra already felt exhausted in ways no one could see. She had been filming for weeks without rest, smiling between takes, pretending that everything was fine. The truth was, her body was giving up before she would allow her mind to admit it. Keanu Reeves stood nearby, watching quietly as she prepared for another take. He noticed her hands trembling slightly when she picked up a glass of water. He also noticed how her breath was shorter than usual. Keanu had worked with Sandra before. He knew her rhythm, her silent discipline, the way she never complained even when the world around her did. That day, something in her silence made him uneasy. When the director shouted, "Action!" Sandra started walking through the dusty field, her face painted with emotion. She delivered her lines beautifully, her voice soft yet strong. Everyone on set was drawn into the moment. Even the crew stopped whispering. But then, halfway through her final line, her voice broke. She blinked, tried to steady herself, and then everything around her seemed to fade. Her knees buckled. The script pages slipped from her hands. The camera caught the brief instant before she fell, her eyes distant, her lips whispering something no one understood. Then she collapsed. A second of silence filled the entire set. The crew froze. Even the director, who rarely lost control, stood stunned. Before anyone could react, Keanu dropped what he was holding and rushed to her side. The sand beneath his boots scattered as he knelt next to her, gently lifting her head. Her skin was pale, her pulse weak. The assistant shouted for water. Someone else called the medic, but Keanu didn't wait for instructions. He held her hand firmly, whispering softly, "It's okay, Sandy, you're all right. Stay with me." The sound of his voice broke the stillness. It wasn't just what he said, but how he said it, calm, warm, and protective. Sandra's eyelashes fluttered as she struggled to open her eyes. Her breathing was shallow. He shaded her face from the sun with his hand until someone brought an umbrella. The medic arrived moments later, checking her vitals. Dehydration, exhaustion, heat stress, too many hours under the sun without proper rest. As the medic placed a damp cloth on her forehead, Keanu gently helped to lift her head so she could drink water. People whispered in the background. Cameras turned away. But Keanu stayed completely focused on her. He didn't let go until she was carried to the rest tent. He walked beside her stretcher, refusing to return to his trailer. When she finally lay down on a small cot, her hand still rested loosely in his, and even though her eyes were closed, she didn't pull away. The director tried to speak. He mumbled something about rescheduling the scene. Keanu turned to him quietly and said, "No more shooting today." His tone was steady, respectful, but final. No one argued. Everyone understood. For a man known for his kindness and calm, that one line carried the weight of command. Hours passed. Sandra rested inside the cool tent while the rest of the crew waited outside, unsure what to do next. Keanu sat beside her the entire time, reading something from her script notebook softly, as if keeping her company even in silence. The crew began packing up for the day, but whispers spread across the set. How he had reacted faster than anyone, how he had stayed until the medic confirmed she was stable, how he didn't care about cameras or schedules, only about her safety. When Sandra finally woke up, the sky outside was turning orange. She opened her eyes slowly, confused at first, then noticed Keanu sitting nearby. He smiled faintly, relief showing in his eyes. "You scared everyone," he said softly. She managed a weak smile. "Guess I gave you another dramatic moment," she joked, her voice still hoarse. He shook his head. "Not the kind of drama anyone wants to see." She looked around, realizing everyone else had left. "You stayed here all this time?" she asked quietly. "Yeah," he said. "Didn't want you to wake up alone." She felt a wave of gratitude that went beyond words. It wasn't just his presence, it was the peace he carried. a calm that filled the space like a quiet melody. For the rest of that evening, they talked about simple things, old films, music, life outside Hollywood. Sandra confessed that she had been feeling pressure to perform perfectly, afraid to show weakness. Keanu listened without interrupting. "You don't have to prove anything," he said. "You already give more than anyone expects." She looked at him, her eyes glistening slightly in the dim light. "You always know what to say," she whispered. He smiled again, this time more softly. "I just say what's true." Later, when the crew returned to check on her, they found her sitting up, sipping water, and Keanu quietly helping her gather her things. The director thanked him, but he only nodded and said, "She did the real work." As night fell, Sandra stepped outside the tent, breathing in the cool air. The sky was full of stars now, and the once noisy film set had turned silent. She turned to Keanu. "Thank you," she said, "for everything." He replied simply, "You do the same for me." She didn't answer, but she knew he was right. And somewhere deep inside, she also knew this moment would stay with her forever. Not because she collapsed, but because someone cared enough to be gentle when the world expected strength. But what neither of them realized was that tomorrow, something else would happen, something that would test that gentleness again, in ways neither of them could have predicted. The quiet storm the next morning arrived with a strange stillness. The sun climbed gently over the desert hills, painting the sand in soft shades of gold, yet something in the air felt heavy. The crew moved quietly, setting up new equipment, trying not to disturb the fragile calm that followed the previous day's shock. Everyone had seen what happened. Everyone had felt the weight of that moment when Sandra fell. Inside her trailer, Sandra sat by the small window, holding a mug of tea she barely touched. Her body was still weak, but her thoughts were heavier than her limbs. She kept replaying the moment in her mind, the sunlight, the dizziness, the fall. And then Keanu's voice calling her name like an anchor, pulling her back from somewhere dark. She wasn't embarrassed, but she was troubled. She had built her career on being strong, composed, reliable. Yesterday she had been none of those things. A gentle knock interrupted her thoughts. She turned. It was Keanu holding a brown paper bag and wearing that quiet half-smile that somehow always carried more warmth than words. "I brought breakfast," he said softly. "You didn't have to," she replied. "I know," he said, walking in. "But you wouldn't eat otherwise." She laughed quietly, shaking her head. "You sound like my brother." He placed the bag on the table and sat across from her. He's probably right most of the time, then. There was a pause, a small one, filled with the sound of wind brushing against the trailer walls. Sandra finally took a sip of the tea. Keanu opened the bag, 2 simple sandwiches and some fruit. Nothing fancy. He pushed one toward her. "Doctor said you need energy." She took it, not arguing this time. As they ate in silence, she looked at him with a soft, curious gaze. "Why do you always stay so calm, Keanu?" she asked. "Yesterday everyone panicked, but you didn't. Even when I was lying there, you didn't look afraid." He leaned back slightly, his eyes thoughtful. "Fear doesn't help anyone," he said quietly. "Panic spreads faster than fire. If one person stays calm, sometimes that's enough to keep others steady." She nodded slowly, thinking about it. "But what about you?" she asked. "Who stays calm for you?" He smiled faintly, but his eyes shifted for a brief second, as if she had touched something private. "I don't really think about it that way," he said. "I try to live in the moment. Take care of what's in front of me." For a moment, she saw a shadow behind his calm, a kind of quiet sadness that spoke without words. She wanted to ask more, but the assistant director knocked, calling her for a short meeting. She sighed, standing up slowly. "Back to work," she said. Keanu nodded. "Only if you're ready." "I am," she said, though she wasn't sure if she meant it. The rest of the day unfolded with a careful rhythm. The crew decided to shoot only dialogue scenes indoors, avoiding the harsh heat. But even in the shade, Sandra's energy faded quickly. Midway through the afternoon, while rehearsing a scene, she lost focus and forgot her lines, something that almost never happened. She laughed it off, but the director noticed. Keanu did too. He didn't say anything right away, but his eyes followed her every time she stumbled or leaned on the table for support. Later, during a break, he found her sitting alone on the steps of a small wooden shack built for the scene. She was staring into the distance, her mind clearly far away. He walked over and sat beside her without saying a word. After a while, she spoke softly. "I'm fine, Keanu. You don't need to babysit me." He looked at her gently. "I know, but friends check in anyway." She turned to face him. "Friends," she repeated quietly, almost to herself. "Yeah, I guess we are." He smiled slightly. "We've been through a lot together." "I think that counts." She looked down, fiddling with her ring. "Sometimes I feel like I have to prove I belong here. Like if I stop for a moment, people will think I'm losing it. Yesterday made me feel weak." He was silent for a moment, then said, "Strength isn't pretending to be fine. It's admitting when you're not." Her throat tightened. She didn't know why his words hit so deeply. Maybe because they came from someone who had lived through his own share of pain and loss. Someone who understood quiet suffering. Just then, one of the crew members ran toward them, calling the director's name. A piece of equipment had overheated and short-circuited, delaying the next setup. The crew scattered to fix it, leaving Sandra and Keanu in a rare pocket of peace. The wind picked up, carrying dust across the empty lot. Sandra closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the breeze on her skin. Keanu watched her, noticing how fragile yet strong she seemed at once. "You know," he said slowly, "maybe what happened yesterday wasn't a failure. Maybe it was a reminder." "A reminder of what?" she asked, opening her eyes. "That even the strongest people need to rest," he said. "And that sometimes life forces us to stop before we break." She didn't respond right away. The words settled into her chest like slow rain. That evening, when the crew finally wrapped for the day, Sandra walked back to her trailer and found something unexpected on her table, a folded note and a small bottle of electrolyte water. She recognized the handwriting immediately. It read, "You don't have to rush the recovery. The story can wait. Health can't." She smiled softly, feeling something she hadn't felt in a while. Seen, cared for, and safe. But as she looked at the mirror, her reflection showed more than tiredness. It showed doubt. She touched her face, realizing how close she had come to pushing herself too far. The next morning was scheduled for a more emotional scene, a sequence where her character confronts loss and breaks down crying. She had always done such scenes with perfect control, timing her tears like choreography. But this time, something inside her felt different. She wondered if she could still hold that same control. Meanwhile, in his own trailer, Keanu read through his lines quietly. He didn't know that later that day, something unexpected would happen. Something that would change not just the mood of the set, but the very bond they shared, because the next time Sandra fell, it wouldn't be from exhaustion. It would be from something she didn't see coming at all. The scene that went too far, the morning sun crept slowly over the horizon, washing the set in pale amber light. The air was quiet, except for the faint hum of generators and the soft chatter of the crew setting up lights. Everyone seemed a little more careful than usual. Yesterday's incident had shaken them, but today they hoped things would return to normal. Still, there was an unspoken tension in the air, a quiet worry that no one dared to voice. Inside her trailer, Sandra sat at her makeup table, staring at her reflection. Her eyes were calm but distant. The makeup artist brushed powder gently across her face, trying not to disturb her thoughts. The script pages lay beside her, open to the scene they would film that morning, the emotional breakdown of her character. It was supposed to be the turning point of the movie, the moment of raw vulnerability that held everything together. As the artist finished, Sandra whispered softly, "Thank you," and took a slow breath. When the assistant knocked to call her to set, she stood, straightened her shoulders, and walked out with quiet determination. Keanu was already there, dressed in character. A simple jacket, dark jeans, eyes full of patience. When he saw her approach, he smiled gently. "How are you feeling?" She gave a half smile. "Ready to cry in front of 100 people. What about you?" "Ready to be there if you need me," he said softly. The director called everyone to attention. This was the scene where Sandra's character breaks down after losing everything. It was emotional, heavy, and personal. She had done scenes like this before, but today it felt different. Maybe because her body wasn't fully recovered. Or maybe because real emotion was waiting under the surface, too close to the edge. The cameras rolled. The scene began with Sandra sitting on a dusty bench, her hands shaking as she tried to hold back tears. Keanu's character entered quietly, standing a few steps behind her. He spoke his lines, gentle and controlled, offering understanding. But Sandra didn't respond right away. Instead, her silence stretched longer than written in the script. Her eyes filled slowly, her breath catching. She whispered the first line, but her voice cracked halfway through. Keanu stepped closer, following the moment naturally, adjusting to her rhythm. She looked at him. And in that instant, the line between acting and reality disappeared. Her tears weren't for the camera anymore. They were real. They came from exhaustion, from the fear she had buried, from the loneliness that fame never cured. Her body trembled, her voice shaking as she delivered the rest of her dialogue with raw emotion that silenced the entire set. Keanu knelt in front of her, holding her gaze, listening, not as an actor, but as a human being. When she finished, the silence was absolute. Even the director forgot to say cut. Sandra lowered her head, sobbing quietly. Keanu reached out slowly and touched her shoulder. It wasn't scripted. It wasn't rehearsed. It was instinct. The moment felt too real, too deep. The crew exchanged uncertain glances. Finally, the director whispered, "Cut!" But his voice trembled. Sandra didn't move. Keanu stayed beside her, not saying anything. After a long minute, she whispered, "I'm sorry. I couldn't stop it." He shook his head gently. "Don't apologize. That was real. That's what acting should be." She lifted her face slightly, her eyes red, her expression soft. "But I wasn't acting," she said. "I think something in me just broke." Keanu looked at her quietly. "Then maybe it needed to." His words lingered in the air, and for a moment, everything else faded. The cameras, the crew, the noise. Just the two of them, caught in a stillness that felt almost sacred. The director finally stepped forward, clapping his hands gently. "That was incredible," he said softly. "We got everything. Take a break, both of you." Sandra nodded, wiping her eyes. Keanu helped her stand, his hand steady against her back. She didn't let go immediately. Back in her trailer, she sat down, her hands still trembling. She had never cried like that on set before. It felt like something inside her had finally released, but it also left her empty and exposed. When Keanu knocked and stepped in, she looked up, her eyes still glassy. "You okay?" he asked softly. She nodded slowly. "Yeah, just a little drained." He handed her a small towel and a bottle of water. "Drink this," he said. She smiled faintly. "You always know the right thing to do." He sat across from her, his tone calm but sincere. "It's not about knowing. It's about paying attention. Most people don't." She looked at him, really looked at him. There was something unspoken between them now, a quiet bond built not from romance or fame, but from shared humanity. Two people who had seen the fragile side of each other in ways the world never would. For a long while, neither spoke. Sandra stared out the window at the desert light flickering across the sand. "You ever feel like this life just takes too much?" she asked softly. Keanu's eyes shifted slightly, thoughtful. "Yeah," he said. "But then you meet people who remind you it's still worth it." She turned back to him, her heart beating a little faster for reasons she couldn't name. Before she could reply, the walkie-talkie on the table crackled. The assistant director's voice came through, nervous. We have a problem outside. Something's wrong with the lighting rig." Keanu stood instantly. "What happened?" "It's shaking." "Might fall," the voice replied. They rushed outside. The tall metal structure that held the overhead lights was swaying dangerously in the wind. The crew scrambled to stabilize it, ropes whipping in the air. Someone shouted for everyone to move back. Sandra froze for a second, watching the heavy beam tilt. Keanu saw it before anyone else. The top section came loose, swinging toward the set where a young assistant was standing, frozen in panic. Without hesitation, Keanu ran forward, grabbed the assistant by the arm, and pulled him clear just as the beam crashed into the ground with a deafening thud. Sand and dust exploded around them. The sound echoed through the valley. People screamed. Someone yelled for help. Keanu coughed through the dust, holding the trembling assistant close. "You okay?" he asked. The young man nodded, eyes wide in shock. Sandra ran toward them, her heart pounding. "Keanu!" she shouted, her voice shaking. He turned, coughing, his face covered in dust but smiling faintly. "I'm okay," he said. The crew rushed in, checking for injuries. No one was hurt, but the incident left everyone shaken again. The director called for a complete safety check, canceling the rest of the day's shoot. As the crowd slowly dispersed, Sandra walked beside Keanu toward the trailers. Her voice was quiet, almost trembling. "You didn't even think, did you?" He shrugged lightly. "There wasn't time to think." "You could have been hurt," she said. He smiled softly. "Better me than him?" She stopped walking, staring at him with tears forming again. "Why do you always do that?" "Do what?" "Put everyone else first." He looked down for a moment, his expression unreadable. "Because I know what it's like to have no one do it for you," he said quietly. Her breath caught in her throat. She wanted to say something, but words failed her. He gave her a small nod and walked toward his trailer, leaving her standing there, overwhelmed by the quiet strength she had just witnessed. That night, as the desert wind moved softly outside, Sandra couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about everything: the fall, the tears, the accident, and the man who had somehow been her calm through it all. And though she didn't realize it yet, tomorrow would bring another moment, one that would change how she saw him forever. The night of truth, the next evening, came quietly, carrying a strange mix of calm and heaviness. The set was still recovering from the shock of the lighting accident. Most of the crew had left early. The director canceled all night scenes, and only a few lights remained on across the empty desert set. Sandra stayed behind, sitting near one of the trailers, wrapped in a thin blanket. The desert wind had turned cool, brushing softly across her face. She couldn't stop thinking about what happened earlier: the beam falling, the noise, the dust, and Keanu's instant reaction. The way he ran without hesitation, how he put himself in danger without even thinking. She had seen bravery before, but there was something different about his kind. It wasn't loud. It wasn't performed. It was quiet, instinctive, human. From a distance, she saw him walking toward her, his steps slow, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. He was wearing a simple dark jacket, his hair slightly messy from the wind. She smiled faintly as he approached. "You couldn't sleep either?" he asked, handing her a mug. She shook her head. "Too much noise in my mind." "Mine too," he said softly. "But coffee helps sometimes." They sat in silence for a while, staring at the dark horizon where the sand met the stars. The night sky was wide and endless, filled with 1,000 flickering points of light. The desert had a way of making everything feel both small and infinite. After a long pause, Sandra spoke, her voice quiet. "You really scared me today." Keanu turned his head slightly. "Me?" "Yeah," she said. "You ran straight toward that falling rig like it was nothing. I thought—" She stopped, her throat tightening. "I thought something would happen to you." He looked at her with calm eyes. "I just reacted," he said. "I didn't want anyone to get hurt." "But you could have been," she said, looking down. "You always do that. You risk yourself without thinking. Why?" He took a slow sip of his coffee, then placed the mug beside him. "I don't really see it as risking myself," he said quietly. "I see it as protecting what matters. Sometimes it's people, sometimes it's a moment. Life gives you choices. I try to choose compassion when I can." She listened, his words sinking deep into her heart. There was a stillness in his tone that came from a place of quiet wisdom, not pride. She turned toward him. "You always sound like you've lived 1,000 lives." He smiled faintly. "Maybe just one life with too many lessons." She hesitated, then asked softly, "What kind of lessons?" His eyes wandered toward the stars. "The kind that teach you how fragile everything is," he said. "How people come and go before you ever get to say what you really feel. How time doesn't slow down for anyone. You just learn to make peace with what you lose. The silence that followed was heavy, yet gentle. Sandra looked at him. Not the actor, not the calm public figure, but the man who carried quiet sorrow behind his steady voice. You've lost people, haven't you? She asked softly. He nodded slowly. Yeah, he said. People I loved. People who grounded me. And when they were gone, I realized how important small kindness can be. A single kind act can save someone's day, maybe even their life. She swallowed hard, feeling her chest tighten. She had read about his past, but hearing it from him was different. His words weren't about tragedy. They were about endurance, about choosing to keep caring in a world that sometimes forgets to. You know, she whispered, you make it sound so simple. But it's not. Not everyone can be like that. He smiled softly. I'm not special, Sandy. I just don't want to add to anyone's pain. For a moment, she couldn't speak. Her throat felt heavy with emotion. She looked at the mug in her hands, then at him. You're wrong, she said quietly. That's exactly what makes you special. He looked at her, his expression gentle, but there was something unspoken in his eyes, a quiet warmth, a flicker of emotion he didn't name. They sat in silence again, the only sound being the soft whisper of the wind. After a while, Sandra stood up slowly, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. I should rest, she said softly. He nodded. You should. She took a few steps, then turned back. Keanu? Yeah? Thank you. For today, for everything. He smiled faintly. Always. She walked back toward her trailer, her footsteps soft on the sand. He stayed there, looking up at the stars, the wind brushing through his hair. Later that night, while everyone slept, the desert turned colder. Sandra couldn't sleep. Her thoughts wandered, between exhaustion and warmth, between fear and gratitude. She kept replaying his words in her mind, and then, just before dawn, something strange happened. A loud knock echoed through the camp. The night guard shouted, waking everyone. Sandra sat up instantly, heart pounding. She opened her trailer door and saw people gathering outside. One of the crew vehicles had broken down near the road, and someone said they saw movement, maybe wild dogs or something worse, around the stranded van. Without hesitation, Keanu grabbed a flashlight and ran toward the commotion. Sandra followed, despite someone telling her to stay back. The wind had picked up, carrying dust and chill through the air. As they reached the road, the scene came into view. Two crew members standing beside a dark van with a flat tire, their faces pale. From the shadows nearby came a low growl. A stray dog, thin and scared, was circling them. Its ribs showed under its fur, its eyes wild with hunger. Don't move, Keanu said softly. He approached slowly, speaking in a calm tone. Hey, it's okay. No one's going to hurt you, the dog snarled, baring its teeth. One of the crew whispered, We should throw something. No, Keanu said firmly. Don't. He crouched down slowly, keeping his movements soft, his voice even lower. Easy, buddy. You're scared, I get it. We're not here to fight. Sandra watched in silent awe as Keanu reached into his pocket and pulled out half a sandwich he had been carrying. He tore off a piece and placed it on the ground. The dog hesitated, sniffed the air, and then crept forward cautiously. Within a minute, the growling stopped. The animal ate the food, its tail lowering. Keanu extended his hand slightly but didn't touch it. He just sat there, speaking softly, until the animal calmed enough to walk away. The crew exhaled, relieved. One of them muttered, How do you always do that? Keanu stood, brushing the dust from his knees. Patience, he said. Fear is loud. Calm is louder. Sandra's eyes glistened as she watched him in the soft light of dawn, the quiet hero no one ever asked for, yet the one everyone needed. When they walked back to the camp together, she spoke softly. You keep proving your own words. He looked at her, confused. Which ones? That small kindness can save someone's day, she said. Maybe even their life, he smiled faintly. Maybe it saved mine too, he said quietly. She looked at him, puzzled. What do you mean? He didn't answer. Instead, he looked toward the rising sun, its first light spilling across the horizon. You'll understand soon, he said softly. And with that, He walked away, calm, gentle, mysterious, leaving her standing in the golden dawn, her heart full of questions she wasn't ready to ask. The weight he carried. The next morning, the desert sun rose quietly, spreading a pale warmth across the still camp. After the long night, most of the crew moved slower than usual. Voices were softer, footsteps careful, as if everyone felt the need to protect the silence that followed what had happened. Sandra walked toward the catering tent, holding her script, but her mind wasn't on the words. It was still on what Keanu said before sunrise. Maybe it saved mine too. Those 5 words had stayed with her all night. They echoed between her thoughts like a song she couldn't stop hearing. She spotted him sitting alone at one of the tables near the edge of the set, drinking coffee and reading something small, maybe a note or an old photo. The wind lifted his hair slightly, and for a moment he looked lost in another time. She hesitated, then walked toward him. "You look like you're reading the past," she said softly. He looked up, startled at first, then smiled. "Maybe I am. Can I sit?" "Of course." She sat across from him, folding her hands. For a few seconds they said nothing. The air between them was calm, but filled with a quiet tension. Finally she spoke. "Last night when you said maybe that kindness saved yours too. What did you mean?" His smile faded slightly. He stared at the cup in his hands, turning it slowly. "It's not an easy story," he said. "I've got time," she replied gently. He took a slow breath. "Years ago," he began, "before one of my biggest films, I went through something that changed me completely. Someone I loved was fighting a serious illness. I spent months at hospitals watching her fade. I tried to keep working, tried to stay normal. But when she was gone, everything went quiet. The world still moved, but I didn't." Sandra listened, her eyes never leaving him. His voice was steady, but behind it lived an ache that time had softened but never erased. "People saw me smiling at premieres," he continued, "but inside I was somewhere else. I used to walk home instead of taking the car, even late at night, because I didn't want the silence to end. One night, I saw an old man sitting on the sidewalk. He looked tired, cold. I had a sandwich with me, so I gave it to him. He smiled, and he said something I'll never forget. He said, 'It's nice to be seen.'" He paused, staring at the horizon. That one line stayed with me. It reminded me that even in the middle of loss, you can still give something small, a moment of care, a reason to stay connected. Sandra felt a sting behind her eyes. She had known he was kind, but this was something deeper. His kindness didn't come from peace. It came from pain, she whispered. "So when you helped that dog last night?" He nodded. "I guess part of me still tries to see what others ignore. Maybe I see myself in those small lost things." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The world felt still again, like time itself paused to listen. Finally, she said, "You know, most people hide their pain behind walls, but you turn yours into light." He looked at her quietly. "Light doesn't belong to anyone," he said. "It's meant to be shared." She smiled faintly, her heart heavy yet warm. "You really are something else, Keanu?" He laughed softly, breaking the weight of the moment. "Just human," he said. The director called out from a distance, reminding them that the next scene would start soon. They both stood, brushing sand from their clothes. But before walking away, Sandra turned to him again. "Thank you for telling me," she said. He nodded. "Thank you for listening." The day moved on, but the air felt different. The tension that had lingered since the collapse was gone. Instead, there was a quiet connection between them, a shared understanding that no words could fully describe. As they filmed through the afternoon, something beautiful happened. Their chemistry, that rare energy between two people who truly see each other, began to glow on screen. The director whispered to his assistant, "This is magic. We're capturing something real." In one particular scene, Sandra's character was supposed to thank Keanu's character for saving her life. But when the cameras rolled, her eyes filled with real emotion. She wasn't acting anymore. She looked at him the same way she had looked earlier that morning, with gratitude that went far beyond the script. The director quietly said, "Cut," but no one moved. It was as if everyone on set felt something sacred pass between them. Later that evening, after wrap, Sandra returned to her trailer. The sun was setting, bathing the sand in soft orange light. She sat by the window thinking about everything. The collapse, the tears, the accident, the dog, the story he told. She realized how much he had carried all these years and how he still managed to remain gentle. There was a soft knock at her door. When she opened it, she found Keanu holding a small paper bag. "You left this at breakfast," he said, handing it to her. She smiled. "I think you just make up reasons to check on me." He shrugged lightly. "Maybe. Or maybe I just worry too much." "You do?" she said, laughing softly. He lingered for a moment, then looked at her with quiet sincerity. "You know," he said, "you remind me that strength doesn't always mean being unbreakable. Sometimes it's being real enough to fall apart and still stand up again." Her throat tightened. "You've been teaching me that since the first day we met," she whispered. He smiled gently. "Then I guess we're both learning." They stood there in the soft glow of sunset, the silence between them filled with understanding. And just as he turned to leave, Sandra reached out and touched his arm lightly. "Keanu," she said softly, "you said the world keeps moving even when we lose people. But maybe that's because people like you keep it moving." He looked at her for a long moment, the faintest hint of emotion in his eyes. "Maybe," he said, "but people like you make it worth moving for." Before she could respond, the assistant director shouted something from outside, a sudden call for both of them to return to the set. There was confusion in the distance. Sandra frowned. "What's going on?" she asked. "Not sure," Keanu said, his expression tightening. They both hurried toward the commotion. The crew had gathered near one of the lighting trucks. Thick smoke was rising from the engine. Someone shouted, "Fire!" Keanu ran forward, grabbing the nearest extinguisher. Sandra followed, calling for others to move back. Chaos spread quickly. Shouts, movement, the smell of burning plastic. Keanu disappeared into the smoke, his figure barely visible. "Keanu!" she screamed, coughing through the haze. Someone tried to pull her back, but she broke free, running toward him. In the dim, smoky air, she saw his silhouette, struggling with the extinguisher, fighting to control the flames before they reached the fuel tank. The fire hissed, spitting sparks. The crew shouted for help. Time seemed to slow, and then a loud crack echoed through the air. The metal casing of the light stand burst apart. The shockwave knocked Sandra backward. The smoke swallowed everything for a moment. The world went silent, and when the dust began to clear, Sandra opened her eyes, but Keanu was nowhere in sight. The promise he left behind, the air filled with smoke and fear. Shouts echoed through the desert night as crew members ran for water, extinguishers, anything they could find. The orange glow of the flames danced against the dark sky, turning everything into a blur of light and panic. Sandra's heart pounded so loudly that she could barely hear the voices around her. "Where is he?" she shouted, coughing through the smoke. "Where's Keanu?" No one answered. People were too busy running, too busy saving equipment, too busy saving themselves. She pushed through the chaos, her eyes stinging, lungs burning. The ground was hot beneath her shoes. The smoke wrapped around her like a storm. She stumbled over a cable, fell to her knees, and called his name again, louder this time, desperate. "Keanu!" A shadow moved in the haze ahead. She crawled forward, waving her hand to clear the smoke. And then she saw him, lying on the ground near the burning truck. One arm over his face, the extinguisher beside him. "No," she whispered, her heart breaking open. She ran to him, dropping beside his body. His jacket was scorched at the sleeve, his face covered in dust and ash, but his chest was moving, shallow but steady. "Keanu, please," she said, shaking his shoulder. "Can you hear me?" He groaned softly, blinking against the light. "Yeah," he whispered hoarsely. "I'm okay." She let out a breath she didn't realize she was holding. Tears mixed with soot on her cheeks as she helped him sit up. The medic rushed in seconds later, checking his pulse, shining a small flashlight into his eyes. "He's going to be fine," the medic said. "Minor burns, smoke inhalation, but nothing worse." Sandra closed her eyes in relief, gripping his hand tightly. He coughed once, trying to smile. Guess I overdid the hero thing again. She shook her head, her voice trembling. Don't joke about that. You scared me half to death. He looked at her, his expression soft despite the pain. You're crying. Of course I'm crying, she said. You could have been... She stopped, unable to finish the sentence. He reached up weakly and brushed his fingers against her cheek. Hey, he whispered. I'm right here. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Everything around them, the fire, the shouting, the chaos, faded into silence. Just the two of them, breathing, alive. Together, later when the flames were out and the crew was safe, Sandra sat with him in the medical tent. His arm was bandaged, his breathing shallow but steady. He looked tired, yet peaceful, like someone who had just fought a storm and found calm on the other side. You really can't stop saving people, can you? She said softly. He smiled faintly. Old habit. You've got to stop calling it that, she whispered. It's more like a curse. No, he said quietly. It's the only thing that keeps me human. Her eyes filled again. She wanted to tell him so many things, how he had changed her, how his kindness had reached places no one else ever could, how she had learned what true strength looked like just by watching him, but all she managed to say was, You're not just kind, Keanu. You're something rare. He looked at her, eyes soft and full of depth. And you, he whispered, remind me that there's still light left in this world. The medic interrupted, handing Sandra a small cup of water. He needs rest, the medic said. Both of you should get some sleep. But neither of them moved. They sat in silence, side by side, under the dim tent light. After a while, Keanu spoke again, his voice barely above a whisper. You know that scene we shot yesterday? The one where your character thanks mine? She nodded. Yeah, you didn't have to act, he said. It felt real. It was, she admitted softly. He smiled faintly, eyes closing slowly as exhaustion pulled at him. Promise me something, he murmured. Anything, she said. Don't lose that fire you have. The world needs it. And what about you? She asked. He smiled. I'll be fine. I always find my way. His hand relaxed in hers, his breathing evening out as he drifted into sleep. Sandra sat there quietly, holding his hand, tears falling silently onto his bandaged arm. Outside, dawn began to rise, soft, golden, and full of life. In the days that followed, production stopped for a while. The accident made headlines, but the world only saw the surface, the heroic rescue, the fire, the recovery. What they didn't see was what happened in the quiet moments after. When Keanu returned to the set a week later, everyone cheered. The director hugged him, the crew applauded, and Sandra couldn't stop smiling. They finished the film together, their performances deeper, richer, filled with a truth that no script could teach. On the final day of shooting, as the cameras wrapped and the crew celebrated, Sandra found him standing alone by the dunes, looking at the sunset. She walked up beside him, their shoulders nearly touching. We made it, she said softly. He nodded. Yeah, we did. You ever think about what comes next? She asked. He smiled faintly. I try not to. The present's enough. She looked at him, the warm light reflecting in his eyes. You know, she said, you told me once that life doesn't slow down for anyone. But I think, just for a moment, it did. When you saved me, when you stayed. He turned toward her, his smile gentle. Then maybe that moment was the point. The wind picked up, carrying sand across the horizon. For a long time, they just stood there. No cameras, no audience, no lines to say. Just two souls who had walked through exhaustion, fear, fire, and found something pure at the end. Before they left, she reached out and took his hand. Thank you, she whispered, for teaching me how to be still when the world burns. He looked at her, his eyes soft with emotion. And thank you, he said, for reminding me that even after the ashes, kindness still matters. The sun dipped below the hills, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Their shadows stretched long across the sand. Two figures walking side by side, not as co-stars, but as two people forever changed by a single story that became real. And though the cameras stopped rolling, the memory of that bond lived on, in quiet hearts, in gentle acts, in moments when life itself reminded them that even the smallest kindness could change everything.